and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This is one of those nights when you realize the spirits have told everybody something else is happening, but we didn't get the word. But here we are. And I want to read a little teaching from Dogen Zenji, and then we can talk about it. My aim tonight was to talk about responsibility, that R word that we don't like to talk about, that is related to that C word that we don't talk about. C word meaning commitment, and R, responsibility, words that we don't like to hear or to talk much about. But I want to talk about responsibility in a little bit different way, as Dogen Zenji teaches. I mean, there are so many different kinds of responsibility that we meet in our lives and in the world. We've got global responsibility, we've got social responsibility, personal responsibility, so many different kinds of notions of responsibility, collective responsibility. And so it's not so easy a thing for us to live with the amount of consciousness toward the responsibilities that we have in this life together. And so it's an important thing for us to consider, to work within ourselves, to see where we are, where we resound in issues of responsibility. And perhaps this comes up so greatly. For instance, we have the coronavirus right now, and what is our social responsibility, our medical responsibility, our responsibility to people who have this illness, to take care of them? What is the global peace that we must meet? What is the global responsibility of our condition of climate change? So we have so much that faces us right now in relationship to this. And so it's overwhelming, actually, for us at this time to think how we could possibly each meet the enormous amount of work required to meet those responsibilities. So we'll just talk a little bit then about Dogen Zenji, but this little teaching, so we know, you know the name Wanshi Shogaku. Wanshi Shogaku. Wanshi Shogaku was a student of Tanka Shijun Daiyosho. You recognize his name in our lineage. And Wanshi Shogaku wrote one of the most beautiful books that we have in our texts in Soto Zen. And that's the book, if I am only allowed one book when I am sent off to the island in exile, that is the book that I would take with me, Wanshi Shogaku. And so, so meditation master Wanshi Shogaku of Mount Tendo in Qingyuan Prefecture was a Dharma heir of Abbot Tanka Shijun. He once said, "When we discuss this matter, which my master Tanka has brought up, it is just like two of us playing a game of Go." Everybody know the game of Go? Do you know what Go is? Go is a board game with black and white pieces that you play together, two people play together. So it was just like two of us playing a game of Go. If you do not respond according to the move I made, I will have caught you off guard. If you experience that this is what has happened, you will be able to grasp Tozan's intention right off. I cannot help but add the following comment in verse. When he looked inside himself, there was no cold or hot, for in an instant the vast ocean had dried up to its very last drop. I say that I can catch the great turtle by just picking it up, but I can't help laughing as you go fishing for it in the sand. The great turtle is Buddha nature. So, for the moment, let's say that there is a game of Go. Well, how about these two players? If we call it a two-person game of Go, there could be an 8-stone handicap. If there is an 8-stone handicap, it would hardly be a game of Go, would it? But if I were to describe it, it would be something like the following. The game of Go is simply a player and his opponent encountering each other. Be that as it may, you should keep in mind Wan Shi's statement. If you do not respond according to the move I made, focusing on it single-mindedly and, while cloaking yourself in it, make a thorough exploration of it. His saying, if you do not respond according to the move I made, is equivalent to his saying, you can never be me. Do not pass over his saying, I will have caught you off guard. Within mud there is the mud. The one who walks in it washes his feet, and also washes his chin strap. Within a pearl there is the pearl. When it is radiant, it illumines both oneself and others. So this final poem refers to the one who walks in it, wash the mud. Within mud there is mud. The one who walks in it washes his feet and also washes his chin strap. And that refers to somebody in Zen practice, in Zen training, who would do everything to completion, to the complete possibility, right up to their chin. So that's what that is referring to. And within a pearl there is the pearl. When it is radiant, it illumines both oneself and others. Oh, Dogen Zenji is sometimes so difficult to understand. And yet, somehow when we soak ourselves in the mystery that, in the way he speaks, something comes forth, we get something. So I think what he is getting at here is this question of playing something fully, or being full to the moment in which we exchange with one another. So to me, it seems, if you do not respond according to the move I made, you can never be me. And I think what Dogen Zenji is referring to, the two people playing Go are the same as one person. And that we simply have this interaction back and forth in some particular harmonious way, and at the same time, in the game of Go, there is this way of politeness in which we overtake the other at the same time, in which we lay down a Go piece and we must respond. And if we are not paying attention, we get caught up. You get caught up. So I would catch you off guard if I play a piece and you do not respond. So in some way, the world is doing this. We are, somehow our collective world is placing these things before us. And the question is, how do we respond? And is the amount of karma that is here catching us off guard? Are we prepared to respond? And how do we respond? Are we aware and prepared? When Dogen Zenji talks about responsibility in practice, or perhaps it is in the Japanese ethic, more so than in our American ethic, that responsibility is an honor that is given to us as we progress in practice. It's a great honor to be placed in a position where you would be responsible for more and more. And so a little bit in our country, we perceive responsibility often as something that we don't want, or that we might consider that we either should be paid for it or compensated in some way for greater responsibilities. But practice is not about that. And awakening has enormous responsibilities to it. Great awakening means great responsibility. So the question is, are we prepared to practice in such a way in which that moment of awakening comes to us and we do not deny it? We are not caught off guard, but we respond fully with all of the concomitant responsibilities that go with awakening. For how easy it is to turn away from awakening, to say, I can't do that. I can't dedicate myself to that. I can't give myself away. Oh, you can't be me in that sense. He says, you can never be me. So much is called upon us in practice then to respond to the enormous challenges before us. I mean, I do not personally have any answers, nor am I suggesting that anybody do any particular thing. It is for each one of us to respond, each in her or his own way. But certainly, one man responded today in the root of his own faith, in making the choice to stand in his faith. It was very deep and wonderful teaching for us, I think, in history, the first time in history that such a thing happened. And so that man took the responsibility of his faith and stood and claimed that, knowing that he would be reviled by his people, knowing that there would be death threats against him. And yet he stood on his faith, wholly on his faith. Big teaching for us. We don't know if we would have that same strength and courage, but he claimed that responsibility. And we meet these kinds of things every day, and I don't think of responsibility as something that is so terrible, perhaps we think it is so terrible when it comes along with our own resistance to it, in which we resist taking the responsibility for something because we know that we're not going to get to do something else that we would prefer to do, or that it's going to demand so much of us, or that it is, we don't know the outcome. I mean, there's a myriad range of complexities around it. Most often it is a question of resistance. Our own ego wants to do something else, or wants to satisfy our lives in some other way. Sometimes that's it. And sometimes we, of course, have to say, I can't do that, I can't meet that. But I think in these times, we have a great deal to examine around that in our culture, and each for ourselves to consider how we are able to respond to that play of go that brings up yet another challenge in our global difficulties, many disasters, many things. So but here as Zen practitioners, our deepest responsibility is to respond to awakening. Without concern about what that responsibility means. We do it because there is nothing more profound. There is nothing more urgent that the world get another shining being in the midst of this great darkness. So I encourage us all to do our best and go forward, understanding also that if we continue to sit and practice, awakening is guaranteed. Awakening is guaranteed. Genzenji says, Shakyamuni Buddha said, everyone who has come along has said, practice is guaranteed. It will happen. But we do have to respond to that next go move. So maybe you have something to add or questions or something.
You mentioned the man who stood and affirmed in his faith. And I think that's sort of how I think about the Bodhidharma story, of when he comes before the ruler and he's asking him, who is it that stands before me? And he says, I don't know. I think about that as like such a Zen response. And then I think of like, what is holding responsibility in that context? Where it's like you're having to hold this thing without knowing who the holder is.
You're talking about Bodhidharma? Or?
Well, like this, I think of responsibility as so much of like surrendering.
Sure. Well, at that moment, Bodhidharma had to speak at the absolute. That was an absolute response at that moment.
But is that not what it is to be accountable?
Yes.
To awakening?
Of course. Of course.
Then what is my question?
I don't know. But it is a good a good thing to say about Bodhidharma. And I think that was that moment. We're speaking about Mitt Romney, who, spoke before the Senate, not before the Senate, but in the Senate building, and there were only 5 other senators in the room at the same time. And he stood on his faith to say, I can't acquit the president. So I don't want to get political around this. It was this man's faith that was what was so stunning, and that he could not betray his own conscience. And so, that was Bodhidharma, and that was Mr. Romney's moment in which he stood in that absolute. And so Bodhidharma also stood in that absolute. And in that great sense, Mitt Romney was not there. Mitt Romney spoke as God speaking, his God speaking to him, and standing before his God. So,
well, then it seems like in that context, then it's affirming what you know to already be true.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But it isn't true in the sense of knowledge. I mean, in Bodhidharma's sense, Bodhidharma is vast emptiness. Bodhidharma had a vast awakening. And in vast emptiness, he could say nothing special. So it wasn't a question of knowledge of any kind. It's a little bit different. We're talking a little bit different in the case of Mr. Romney, in which he is responding to a set of evidence before him that he could not deny. And in Bodhidharma's sense, Bodhidharma is standing in vast emptiness, which is, the pure intuitive state of the absolute. And in Mitt Romney's case, he is a single soul standing before his God and saying, I cannot deny my conscience. And so a slightly different texture, we would say, perhaps because of the different textures of the faith in which they stand. So,
one seems to be coming from a moral place.
Yes. Yeah. And Bodhidharma is just in an absolute emptiness.
Because I share that sentiment of, like when you said that in our culture we think of responsibility as this thing that we don't want. I guess I relate to that, and I want to understand why. And it just seems like another thing.
Well, I think I also tried to point out that it is very often, I don't mean you, but it's very often an ego response in which I would be called upon to do stuff that I think I would be called upon to do that I don't necessarily want to do because I prefer to be doing something else. So don't ask me to do that because I really want to go over here. So these preferences that we make sometimes determine our response to a responsibility. And granted, we can't do everything in life. We can't respond to everything. But there are certainly times when we may be called upon to accept a responsibility without a preference. It's just, that must be done. So I think of Gandhi, for instance, who saw the salt march and he responded, immediately did his salt march. And that was extraordinary responsibility. He could have been arrested and thrown into prison for the salt march, and yet they made the salt march. So, no choice in that. Once he saw that had to be done. No preferences whatsoever.
When I think of this, it seems like when a person comes to understand their task as an extension of their faith itself, I would think like that's what you would need to sort of be able to respond that way.
Right.
So it's not like brushing your teeth or taking out the garbage per se.
Mm-mm.
It's sort of like the thing that you were meant to do.
Sure, but in our practice, if we do not take up the menial responsibilities, we don't get to those others. We don't get to the higher responsibilities that are where that true practice is. So we must not shirk those small things. We must be willing to pick up after one another. If we are not, there is no hope for the humankind. If we cannot pick up after one another. So if we see a piece of garbage on the floor, or something on the floor of the temple in front of the Buddha, we pick it up. It doesn't matter who put it there or how it got there. We pick it up because we offer the Buddha the pure cleanliness of the temple. And actually the temple is everywhere. So we do our best then to pick up as we go. I was once in my teacher's kitchen and I was washing the cups that we had used for tea, and there were other dishes from his dinner that were in the sink, and I didn't wash them. And to this day I regret that. I regret my smallness. And I hope for everybody that we would grow to be as deep enough to be able to regret our smallnesses. It's a really deep matter. Yes.
I wonder about, discernment in terms of seeing needs or seeing in many games of Go, seeing multiple plays being made by different actors, or
Yes.
and the process of discerning what game to play and when to make a move.
There are so many, aren't there? It's impossible to think about. But so discernment, certainly, we have to have at the same time that we must give ourselves away and be ready to respond responsibly wherever that is. At the same time, we must discern when or how can I say this now? I think maybe we can discern whether it is correct for us, so that we don't just thrash out into the world and do anything that might cause harm even. So, like Gandhi, who waited to see what was the right go move in making salt, he sat for years waiting. And so practicing his faith at the same time, meditating and waiting to be able to see what was correct. And so he went. Now he's a special case. For most of us, our lives are a little bit different from that. And so we maybe don't have years to sit around waiting for something to appear on our doorstep that tells us to go this way or that way. So we go out into the world as best we can, using inner discernment to understand what way we might take in any given action, and at the same time taking great care that that discernment isn't ego wrapped, so that while we may have something important to do in the world, it's all important, and we may be acting in the world waiting for that moment that is the culmination that wraps up the game. I'm talking in circles, and I don't know if I'm making any sense about this. So, two people are playing Go, and I think that it's a very intuitive play. Well, we have one Go player over here, and I don't think there's a lot of thought necessarily. It's a kind of a courteous response. That one plays, puts down a white, and then black plays in some way after one has learned the game very, very well. And it's a courtesy of response to appreciate what that game is, and at the same time respond well. Is that correct?
I mean,
Sort
it
of.
depends on the player too.
Yeah, and we're talking about a big game, of course, in the world, the big Go. Let's say that the whole world is a game of Go, and we are, one of the stones in it. And we're moving along, trying to create a harmonious world together in which we respond well and care of one another. And so, discernment is we don't talk about discernment so much in Zen practice, I think. It's deeply a Christian practice in Christian faith. Discernment is a very important being with oneself and God, and asking for God's word. At least that's my experience of discernment. And so we do that at the same time in some way to understand how should I respond. And we're called upon to respond at every single moment, and we sit with wisdom, and we sit zazen with the birth of wisdom in us. We call it wisdom, a little bit different from discernment. Allowing wisdom to respond when we must respond, and actually responding to life in every moment. I don't know if that answers your question at all. Is there a lot of thinking in the game of Go? Or do you appreciate that move that you join?
Well, I think it's very contextual even in a game, because opening moves are so different from in-game moves.
Mm.
It's almost like you spend the majority of the time playing in the first maybe 30 moves even, and then it becomes quicker and quicker. So I think how you experience thought changes. But I think I understand this question though.
Okay,
Around
answer.
discernment.
Yes, please answer.
I think just a different way of
Sure, please.
framing the question. But to me it's like, every moment, I think there are so many tasks that I could do. If I just looked for something to do, I could find it. And I could spend my whole life doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, finding the thing to be responsible for and learning how to sort of separate task, I think, is the whole nature of the work, it seems. I mean, if I wanted responsibility, I could go get a job at like a restaurant, or, you know, and I don't think that, I think maybe that's the thing that seems strange to me. When I think of responsibility, I think of chores, I guess. And it's like, I don't know how to put that in a spiritual context exactly.
They're all spiritual.
I know, but then I think if you conclude that, then why does it matter to do some things more than others? And like, when do you take a break then? Because I feel like sometimes I don't do things to maintain myself, and that seems appropriate.
There's self-care in this. It isn't that one doesn't get to rest. That's also a responsibility to oneself to remain healthy of a spirit, a heart and spirit. That's also a responsibility. But, as Zen practitioners, our main responsibility is to awakening. A responsibility to place ourselves in a situation that fosters it or brings it about or makes it more possible. And then there's the big responsibility that comes with it.
And there are the responsibilities that are thrust upon us, and we have to make the decision at that time what we're going to do. Mitt
Correct.
Romney was faced with that today.
Yes, he was.
The devout Catholic German farmer, and during World War II in the foothills of the Alps, really did not want to lie, never lied in his life because he was very true to his faith. And one day a Jewish family comes to his farm and asks to be transported over to Switzerland in the wagon, and he goes every day to go and bring things across back and forth. And every day the border guards always ask him, are you hiding any Jews, kind of as a joke. And he goes every day, he says, yes, of course I am. And it's a joke.
Yeah.
This time he loads up the wagon with the Jews, and they ask him, do you have Jews in the back of your wagon? And he said, of course not. He was faced with that moment to do something, and
Yes.
sometimes we're faced with things we have to make the decision if we're going to engage.
Sure.
And there are some times when we just can't.
Yes. Right.
We just can't.
Right.
And we have to make that discernment at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a difficult thing, because when we do make that decision, are we making it based on convenience for ourselves? Or
Fear.
an excuse? Fear?
Fear.
Any number of things.
Sure.
And so it's a very, very difficult thing.
Yes.
It's like dancing on a blade.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think we can't know until that moment comes
Yeah,
what,
exactly.
how we're going to respond.
We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, Romney said that he spent the entire week of the impeachment just really having a difficult time dealing with how he was going to do, what was he going to do. And when it came to that moment, well, he knew ahead of time that that was what he had decided to do. And so he was at peace with himself. And history will record him well.
Mhm.
Thank you. I think
Yeah.
something that was helpful, one thing that was particularly helpful in what you shared was, I think discernment being broad, and maybe just the word has been associated with Christian context. But
Yeah.
I think that it really is a matter of decision. I think
Mhm. Right.
thoughtful decision making.
Right. Certainly listening to one's inner state.
And I think
Yeah.
the one thing that particularly hit me was this idea that above all, we're committed to pursuing enlightenment.
Yeah.
Or devoted to deepening our relationship with wisdom and our oneness with
Yes.
wisdom.
Yeah.
And the idea that when you're pursuing wisdom or enlightenment, which in my mind is kind of just like a bright light, then it illumines the things around it and helps one to make decisions more clearly
Right.
with light shining on it.
Right.
And for me, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's a good place to finish. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to be